Well, we're now joined by William Pellerin, a former Deputy Director for North American Trade at Global Affairs, these days a partner who specializes in international trade at McMillan. William, thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Listen, I want to begin with the broad-based question because this was coming up in discussions when we were down in D.C. this week. Is continental free trade, as we have known it since the late 80s, coming to an end?
I think so, in many ways, absolutely. I mean, we heard Secretary Lutnick at the Canada-U.S. Summit today talk about how automotive manufacturing was going to happen in the United States first, that the U.S. would be first and Canada could potentially be second. Those types of statements really go to the idea that free and fair trade flowing across borders in a way that we think of North America as an integrated whole has some cracks in it. Now, I don't think it'll go away entirely, of course, but I think those cracks are going to become quite important.
Yeah, quite important. So much so that we heard Donald Trump in that news conference in the Oval Office yesterday talk about how he was open to bilateral deals and the fact that he likes bilateral deals more than multilateral deals. Is that what we're going to go back to, do you think?
I think the CUSMA USMCA in its form right now will probably survive. I think that makes sense. I think we're not immune from side deals, however. And so the CUSMA might exist in its current shape, and then there might be a lot of bilateral side letters on things like the 232s, the Section 232 tariffs, sectoral tariffs. So I think that will probably complement the CUSMA, and then he's going to be striking small deals left, right, and center with all sorts of countries.
Mm-hmm. Small deals based on the industry, based on the sector, is what I take from that.
And in some ways, he's going to have to do that because he won't always have the authority from Congress to actually do trade deals. And so in some ways, what he's doing now with the UK or with Japan or with the EU and Korea is signing these small deals that just roll back the tariffs that he unilaterally imposed. But these are not comprehensive free trade deals in the sense that we understand them to be.
Yeah, well that's interesting you use those words because I did want to ask about you who understands trade deals as well as you do. I hear you say that CUSMA will probably survive in some form, but we also are hearing great criticism from the United States. If at the end of the day, the Trump administration wants to get out of CUSMA, how easy would that be?
As a matter of law, quite simple. I mean, there's a 6-month notification period that exists for someone to actually exit, for one of the parties to exit the CUSMA, so they could trigger that exit any time. That's a nuclear option and would have massive repercussions on the U.S. economy as well as Canada's and Mexico's, especially if there's not something immediately lined up to take over. So I don't anticipate that would happen. It might be threatened along the way, but I think that's probably a step too far even for this administration. On the other hand, there might be side deals or major renegotiations at the same time as we move forward.
Yeah, and we may actually see an example of those side deals in a matter of weeks because the Canadian and American officials have been told now to work on aluminum, steel, energy, and a few weeks is kind of the rough timeline that we're receiving. What do you take away from that? Does that set the course for what we're going to see going forward, do you think?
I think so. And I think that'll be really important, but there's probably a very small window for these side deals, small deals, before it all gets rolled into the CUSMA renegotiation. And that window is probably closing. I'd give it 3-4 months tops before we're in full-fledged renegotiations, and there might not be as much room at that point for small side deals. So I think getting
does
a
that
deal
create greater urgency for the Canadians?
I think it does. I do think it does. In order to get a deal, for example, on steel, aluminum perhaps less important, autos certainly very important, and I can explain why I think aluminum is a little bit less important, but not for the Canadian economy, but because they can absorb the tariffs in the United States. I think we're going to see a lot of devastation in the Canadian economy around furniture and kitchen cabinets, which are new sectoral tariffs that are kicking in next week, heavy trucks. We're going to see all sorts of issues around there. And these are, especially on the furniture and the smaller companies that produce these goods that will be now subject to a new tariffs coming in. those don't have the deep pockets to absorb in the same way as perhaps our global steel producers might.
You know, and as we watch what goes on with the United States, of course, part of the strategy for the Carney government is to diversify markets, not just rely on the United States. How quickly might that help, you know, stench the bleeding, if you will, from what's going to come from the United States?
Yeah. So what we're seeing from our clients is really a mixed bag. So for some, absolutely, there's potential export markets other than the United States. But I always go back to, you know, a typical example of a furniture manufacturer in Winnipeg that produces relatively high-end furniture. You know, they're not going to find alternative markets overnight. They're not shipping that to Asia to compete with the Chinese product. They're more or less landlocked, very costly to ship these products outside of Canada. They're built for the United States. The relationships also are really important. So I think that's often the piece that's missed when people talk about trade diversification. It's great that Canada has the free trade agreement framework set up, but the business-to-business relationship is what is going to drive the sales, what's going to drive the exports. And until you have years of relationships built with your suppliers or your customers in foreign countries, which is often, you know, ingrained in the North American relationship for decades, you can't replace that. You know, you have to go to the conferences, you have to go to the trade shows, you have to meet those customers and shake their hand time and time again before you land those sales.
Well, without a doubt, the next few weeks are going to be very interesting to watch. We'll probably bug you again, William, but for tonight, thank you for this.
A real pleasure. Thanks.